So, the recent South Park episode that dealt rather bluntly with the issue of trans athletes participating in women's sports occasioned me to make a video that I've wanted to make for a while now. And as I wade into these waters, I want something to be abundantly clear when I make this video. And that is that I am not attempting to I do not intend to in any way, shape, or form antagonize trans people or be unsympathetic to their situation. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, because in iterations past, I have tried to go for cheap laughs and come off as a shock jock and that kind of thing. And what happens is you develop a reputation for that, and people ignore what you're actually trying to say. So I'm not trying to go for any kind of punchline or antagonize anybody. I really do want to try to have some thoughtful discussion here. Because this is an issue where I am someone who would like to be on the side of the group in question, but the dialogue around the issue prevents me from participating in a constructive manner, if that makes sense. The second reason is because I actually do have friends and know people, have acquaintances that are transgender, and in some cases I've been a friend to them during their transition. So I don't want to come off as dismissive in this regard at all. For that reason, and I also don't want to say anything more about it than that, because those friends in my life are not those are people that are important to me. They are not tokens to be pulled out and held up to shield criticism and that kind of thing. But if you are out there and you perceive yourself as potentially coming to this video, listening to this video from a perspective of potentially disagreeing with me, what I would really like it if we could do is put our guns down on both sides and actually talk about this. Because I think all too often what happens is we ignore, we want to categorize people, and to quote Harry Potter, the world is not divided into good people and Death Eaters, Harry. There can be people who are trying to feel things out, who like me feel a bit lost because they just see it as having to choose between two extreme positions when they don't really agree with either one, but at the same time don't want to have a bad or antagonistic relationship with people. So if you can indulge me that actually is my position and not scream transphobe, I would really appreciate it. If you can't indulge that, then I just recommend you stop watching this video right now, because I'm doing this out of a concerted effort to have a productive dialogue. So, anyway, what I want to get at is not the trans people in sports issue specifically, mainly because, from what I can tell, the science is kind of the science is the question for me. I have heard that I've heard people, various trans advocates, say that there is science to suggest that once you start male to female hormone replacement, after a year's time, your bone density and muscle mass have gone down enough that you fall within a spectrum of physical strength that would be observed in genetically born women, and as such, you no longer have an unfair advantage. If that's true, then I think it would be fair to say, yes, you can compete provided you've been through 1 year of treatment. So that's the science is what I'm leaning on there. That's the issue that I lean on there. And if the science is there and the science is good, then I have no problem with it, no issue whatsoever. I do question the unfair advantage thing. I think that's a reasonable concern. Like I said, let's lead with the science, not the accusations. And I say that because I have not gone through and reviewed the science. For all I know, the evidence could be in, and it could be a total non-issue. So I'm not really taking a stance on that per se. That said, what's been on my mind lately, and it's something that I've articulated to friends in the past, friends and close associates in the past, is for me, the issue of trans people and accepting trans people was an issue that was uh, already settled from a sociological standpoint, and the issue was just how do we get people comfortable with accepting these people into society? You know, how do we promote tolerance of these people? How do we get people to accept them? That kind of thing. And what's happened is it seems like there's this additional stage that the discussion is taking. And so let me elucidate the way I found out about. I knew growing up. I grew up in a fairly liberal household, and actually a very liberal household, if I'm being honest. And so I knew, for example, that there were men and women who chose to express a different gender identity, and I knew that at a very young age. I knew what cross-dressing and drag queens were at a very young age, and I actually knew what transgenderism was at a fairly young age as well, because I actually can remember one of my dad's coworkers, former coworkers at the by the time it got to the news, but one of my dad's former coworkers who had lived her life up until that point as a man, transitioned, became a woman, and there was actually an article in the AJC about it. My dad showed me that article and explained it to me, and so that's an early recollection I have of having all of that concept explained to me, and it seemed fairly settled. You know, there seemed to be people out there. There were people out there who would say, well, they're not really a woman because they can't have children, or they're not really a man because they don't have a penis. That kind of thing. There would be those people out there, and the general response to those people was just, "Oh, come on, give it a break. It's not a problem for you." It's like Patton Oswalt said, Patton Oswalt has a great comedy routine where he says, talking about the trans issue, he says, people say, "Oh, that sounds disgusting," and you say, "Yeah, but they're going to wear pants." "Oh, okay." Yeah, and he says, "It can't be that big a deal if the solution is pants." That would be where I stood on it. And then the nature of the dialogue shifted. And it's weird because it's not the issue of trans people that I have a problem with. It's not the issue of identifying them as their chosen gender that I have a problem with. It's the way that the new discussion is happening that I have a problem with. And, I'll give you an example. This thing keeps coming up about the realness of trans people. Do you think they are really their new gender? And I will emphasize that my general response to that would be yes. To put that in perspective, why do I think that? Well, because I think Bailey J is attractive and Buck Angel is not, basically. But so I have no problem identifying them that way because they convey that new gender to me. And so lacking specific mechanics is not an issue of them being that gender, just like there are people who are born that gender that lack specific mechanics, so that's not an issue for me. But then what happens is they push the question, the realness thing. Like, for example, I remember Sarkeesian put up a tweet, for example, that said, "Trans women are real women, end of discussion." Well, again, I come to that as somebody that wants to agree, but the problem that I have with that is people don't like it when you tell them they're not allowed to think. That doesn't, your statement of that does not end the discussion. And I realize that the impetus for saying that is that you want to minimize harm to, minimize emotional and psychological harm to trans people. You want to end a discussion that can be levied to as a means to antagonize them. I get that. But we lose out we lose out on a very important facet of acceptance and of tolerance when we try to do it that way. When we try to impose on people rather than working with them. So, where I would previously have no problem with saying a trans person is really their gender, the dialogue has shifted. It feels like it's now been weaponized. It feels like what happens is it pushes to a point where you would no longer, it's like instead of just leaving it at yes, like that's enough, the dialogue now pushes to a point where you are forced to say no. I'll give you an example. Let's say that a man goes to war, or a woman, but a person goes to war. They are injured in combat. They lose a leg. They step on a landmine, or they're shot. They get their leg shot off, or whatever. They lose a leg in battle. They come home. They are treated with an artificial limb which allows them to walk. Okay. They are now able to walk and go around existing in the world as a two-legged person, living the life of a capable two-legged person. If you asked me, does that person have two legs? I would say yes, even though one of them is non-biological. If you were to then tell me, if you were to say, does that person have two human legs? I would say no. And it would not logically follow for you to then say, well, you're a bigot. You're scared of the handicapped if you don't think this person has, or you're scared of amputees if you don't think that this person has two functioning biological human legs. And you come at, and then I say, well, it's not an opinion. This is basic reality. They don't, and so you say, well, you're hurting that person's feelings. By denying that they have two functioning human legs, are denying their identity, and you're hurting them. And you say, I'm not trying to hurt them. You, by antagonizing me with this ridiculous line of questioning, are creating a circumstance that is hurting them. I was not going out of my way to make the distinction between a prosthetic leg and a biological human leg. You, by forcing the issue, are the one that is causing them psychological harm. So, bringing that around to the trans issue, when you bring up the realness, quote unquote, of trans people, it comes down to, well, go ahead and do the voice. It depends what you mean by real. I mean, it comes down to a question of what are you putting into that basket, that realness basket. Do they physically have the appearance? Do people who have committed to transitioning from one gender to the next actually, do they have physical appearance that conveys that gender? Yes. Do they, furthermore, do I think, I have heard, I can't quote the science to you, but I have heard science in the past that says that we identify gender more off of secondary characteristics than we do off of primary sexual characteristics, because obviously the primary characteristics, the genitalia, are never seen. So I share a sense of mutual identity with those people, that they are that gender. If I was in a relationship with one of those people, I would refer to them as my boyfriend, girlfriend, at the dictate of how they identified. But I feel like the current crop of woke political correctness discussion instead wants to antagonize that issue and push it to the point of saying, of getting you to a point where you're forced to say no. And after getting you to that point, acting like you are some kind of bigot. Hopefully I've made some sense here. I know this is a controversial topic, and it's just something I want people to think about. That maybe we are maybe it is by pushing the issue further than it needs to go, that is what's creating uh, difficulty, harm, and stress, and anxiety and difficulty for trans people. That maybe we actually did get on a decent, settled uh, terminology or perspective on this matter, uh, say, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and now and now instead of promoting general acceptance of that, we've started trying to push past what would logically be required to make that argument. Uh, by opening this kind of I feel like we've opened kind of a Pandora's box. By saying, okay, we have. I would say 20 years ago. 20 years ago was when I graduated from high school. Well, I graduated in 2002, so almost 20 years ago. But when I was kind of, formulating perspective on these things, and by the way, I mean, I am someone who got, I'm someone who got called faggot all throughout school, except for the 2 years I spent at theater school, where it was actually a kind of an honorific. But anyway, I got called faggot all throughout school. I am a long-haired man with pierced ears who loves Broadway musicals and weightlifting. I love that we live in a world where I can choose from column A and choose from column B the things that I want, and that makes me. I think that I like that. I think that's great. I wouldn't want to live any other way. And I've been face to face with the kind of bigoted homophobia and genuine transphobia that these people have fought against. So I understand that, but I feel like we came to a good set of definitions back then. You have people who were born male, people who were born female, people who decide, and from that, and the biological, the kind of, I don't want to sound insensitive, but the kind of offshoot of people who are born intersexed, who through biological reasons of biological birth have no actual gender. By the way, I really can't bring myself to extend that definition to people who are just pretentious jackasses pretentious emo people who just decide, oh, I didn't have a gender. Like, unless your DNA test says otherwise, I'm sorry. I'm not going there. Anyway, that's not about that though. That could be a subject for another video. Anyway, but we have these three categories, and there are subsets within. I understand that there are subsets within the intersex discussion because there are different genetic factors and different genetic issues that can arise that bring somebody to that point. So this all works. I mean, this is fairly, and then within male, female, intersex, there are people who decide that or who come to realize. I would say it's not something they really decide. It's something they come to realize that they are not. Their mental processes are not in line with the body that they were born with. They decide to transition, that kind of thing. I think all of this was out there, and all of it was on the table and on the discussion. And I think we had a good working set of definitions back then. We've moved into another realm of discussion where we try to take we try to take immutable facts of reality and say, if you can't ignore these things, then you are automatically bigoted. And I don't think it works that way. I don't like the idea that we have redefined the discussion in such a way that if we are not, it's not just that we're in, it's not just that we want a social contract that is benevolent towards these people and their needs. It's like the people who are the advocacy groups for these people they can't rest and they can't sit still until they know that they've fully gotten inside your head and fully broken you and fully changed the way you think. That's what I feel, and that's what occurs to me. So anyway, hopefully I've made some sense. If you can, if you have thoughts, let me know in the comments below. This is very much a matter of me thinking aloud. I'm not trying to take a fixed, rigid stance on this. I'm trying to have an actual dialogue. So If you want to comment below, I welcome your thoughts in any way. I hope you're having a good Sunday. Take care.